The mysterious auction. The auction house on Ziffer 9 was a place of shadows and whispers. The air smelled of smoke, oil, and something rotten. Dim red lights flickered over rows of alien buyers, each sitting behind metal tables covered in digital screens. Some wore heavy cloaks, hiding their faces. Others, massive creatures with scales or fur, sat proudly, their glowing eyes scanning the stage. It was not a place for kindness. Tonight, they were selling rare goods, weapons, rare minerals, even living creatures. The last one on the list, a small, fragile alien girl. She stood on the raised platform, hands tied in metal cuffs. Her skin was pale silver, almost glowing in the dim light. Her large blue eyes, filled with fear, darted across the room. She was thin, too thin, and her white dress was torn and dirty. She shivered as the auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall. Next, we have something very special. A rare female of unknown origin. Strong genetic traits, perfect for labor, experiments, or entertainment. The crowd murmured. Some laughed. Some leaned forward, their greedy eyes scanning the girl as if she were nothing more than an object. The girl did not cry, but her hands trembled, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. A robotic assistant walked up to her and pulled her head up roughly, forcing her to face the audience. She flinched but stayed silent. The auctioneer, a tall alien with 4 glowing yellow eyes, grinned. "Shall we start the bidding at 10,000 credits?" A large, insect-like alien raised a hand. 10,000, the auctioneer confirmed. 12,000, growled a massive reptilian warlord, his voice deep and cold. 20,000. The bids continued, climbing higher. Each bidder had their own reason. Some for money, some for power, and some for reasons too dark to speak. Then, a new voice cut through the room. 50,000. Silence. Heads turned toward the back of the hall. A human stood there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long brown coat over dark armor. His face was rough, lined with old scars. His eyes, sharp, steady, stared straight at the auctioneer. The crowd whispered, "A human." Here, humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. They usually kept to themselves, staying out of trouble. The auctioneer recovered from his surprise and chuckled. "A bold offer. Do we have 55,000? Silence. The reptilian warlord narrowed his eyes, his claws tapping against the table. The insect-like alien twitched but said nothing. The other buyers muttered among themselves. No one outbid the human. The auctioneer sighed. "Sold. To the human." The girl's eyes widened in shock. 2 guards grabbed her, unlocking the metal cuffs before pushing her forward. She stumbled but caught herself. The human walked up to her. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything. But for the first time, someone looked at her without hunger, without cruelty. He held out his hand. She hesitated. Could she trust him? Or was he just another kind of monster? Before she could decide, a loud crash shook the room. The reptilian warlord slammed his massive fist onto the table. "Wait, I demand a second bidding round." The auctioneer hesitated. Another alien, a thin, sharp-faced smuggler, smirked. "Yeah, we can't let some human walk in and take what he wants." Murmurs of agreement spread. The auctioneer, sensing the mood turning dangerous, smiled awkwardly. "Gentlemen, the auction is final." The warlord stood up, towering over everyone. "The human didn't even check if she's worth the price. That's suspicious." His reptilian tongue flicked. "Maybe. He knows something we don't." The crowd murmured louder now. Suspicion turned into greed. What if the girl was more valuable than they thought? The human's jaw clenched. He knew this was trouble. One of the slaver guards took a step toward him. "Hand her over, human. We'll refund your credits." The girl froze in fear. The human. He didn't move. The guard reached for him. But in a blink, the human struck. A swift punch to the face. The guard collapsed instantly. The room exploded into chaos. The human grabbed the girl's wrist. "Run." She obeyed. Blaster fire rang out. Guards shouted. Tables overturned. The human and the girl raced toward the exit. The reptilian warlord roared. "Stop them." More guards rushed forward. The human fired back, taking down 2, 3. He was fast, precise, deadly. They reached the exit door. It was locked. The girl's hands trembled. She suddenly reached out, pressing her fingers against the control panel. A spark of blue light flashed. The door unlocked. The human's eyes widened. What? No time for questions. He grabbed her hand, and they ran into the night. Behind them, alarms blared. The auction house was on high alert. Every bounty hunter, every slaver in the city, would soon be after them. The human looked at the frightened alien girl beside him. He had just risked everything for a stranger. And now, the whole galaxy wanted them both dead. The Great Escape. The night air on Ziffer 9 was thick with smoke and neon haze. The city was alive with crime, its dark alleys crawling with bounty hunters, smugglers, and killers. The stench of oil, rust, and something rotten filled the streets. Ethan Voss gritted his teeth as he pulled the alien girl through the winding back streets. His coat flapped behind him, his boots splashing through puddles of unknown liquid. Behind them, the alarms from the auction house screamed through the city. The hunt had begun. The girl stumbled, her thin body weak from exhaustion. Ethan caught her before she could fall. "Keep moving," he ordered. She didn't understand his words, but she understood the urgency. She nodded and forced herself forward. Above them, bright red lights flickered on the massive holo billboards. The wanted posters updated in real time. Ethan saw his own face flash across the screen. Wanted, human male, armed and dangerous. Reward, 100,000 Siridatis. The girl's face appeared next. Estualian Tidgar OP Return for reward. Ethan's jaw clenched. They didn't even see her as a person, just property. The bounty was high, too high. That meant one thing. They knew who she was. They won't stop hunting her. And now, they won't stop hunting me. Footsteps echoed behind them. Loud, heavy boots. The bounty hunters were already here. Ethan pulled the girl into a side alley and pressed his back against the cold metal wall. He motioned for her to stay silent. She obeyed, holding her breath. 2 figures appeared at the alley entrance. One was a hulking reptilian warrior in battle armor. The other, a pale, sharp-faced man with cybernetic eyes scanning the area. The human couldn't have gone far, the cyborg muttered. Heat scanners pick up 2 life forms nearby. Ethan cursed silently. The reptilian warlord grunted. The slavers want her alive. The human, they don't care. Shoot on sight. Ethan's muscles tensed. The girl squeezed her eyes shut. She was trembling. He had 2 options, wait and hope they pass, or strike first. Ethan had never been good at waiting. He moved. Fast. Bang. 1 quick shot, straight to the cyborg's scanning eye. Sparks exploded as the man screamed, staggering back. The reptilian warrior roared and charged. Ethan ducked, rolling to the side as the massive alien's claws slashed through the air. He fired 2 shots, hitting the creature's thick armor. No effect. The reptilian swung its tail, a brutal, crushing force. Ethan dodged, barely. Too slow, too strong. The girl pressed herself against the wall, terrified. The cyborg, still clutching his damaged eye, raised his blaster. Ethan had seconds. He threw himself forward, not away, but toward the reptilian. The move surprised the alien. Ethan grabbed the slaver's own knife from his belt and drove it deep into the exposed part of his neck. The warrior let out a horrible, choking growl before collapsing. Ethan turned, blaster raised. The cyborg had recovered. He aimed. BZZZT. A bright blue pulse of energy shot from behind Ethan. The The cyborg's body convulsed, his blaster falling from his hand. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. Ethan spun around. The girl was standing there, her fingertips glowing blue, small sparks of energy still crackling in the air. Ethan stared. She just took him down. She looked at her hands in shock, as if she herself didn't fully understand what she had just done. Ethan didn't have time for questions. "Come on." He grabbed her hand, and they ran. The chase. The city was alive now. Bounty hunters, patrol drones, and slaver enforcers swarmed the streets. The bounty had made them the most wanted fugitives on Sci-Fi. Ethan pulled the girl through market stalls, knocking over crates of strange alien fruit. Vendors shouted angrily, but Ethan didn't stop. From above, patrol drones swooped down. Red targeting lasers locked onto them. "Surrender now. You cannot escape." Ethan yanked the girl behind an old hoverbike and fired 3 quick shots. The first 2 missed. The third hit its target. The drone exploded in a rain of sparks. But the noise drew more attention. A group of hunters rounded the corner. One of them, a green-skinned alien with cybernetic arms, smirked. "That's a pretty high bounty for a human. Guess I'll be rich tonight." Ethan fired first. The fight was brutal. Blaster fire lit up the night, and Ethan moved like a soldier, quick, precise, deadly. 1, 2, 3 hunters down. But there were too many. A stun blast hit Ethan in the shoulder. His vision blurred. Another hit to his side. The girl screamed as the hunters closed in. Ethan staggered, struggling to stay on his feet. He reached for his weapon. Too slow. A hunter aimed at him, ready to fire the final shot. Then, a deafening roar. The ground shook. A shadow loomed over them. From above, a massive ship descended, engines roaring. A sleek, black vessel, the Starborn. The boarding ramp lowered. A voice crackled through the comms. "Get in. Now." Ethan didn't think. He grabbed the girl, hauling her up the ramp just as more bounty hunters arrived. Blaster fire struck the ship's hull, but the Starborn's shields held. The moment Ethan and the girl were inside, the ship's pilot, an old friend Ethan wasn't expecting to see, punched the controls. The Starborn shot into the sky, leaving Sci-Fi behind. Ethan collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. The girl sat beside him, still trembling. He looked at her. She looked at him. They had escaped, for now. But the hunt had only just begun. Who is she? The Starborn shot through the endless black of space, its engines humming as it left the chaotic world of Sci-Fi behind. The once bright neon lights of the slaver city were now nothing but a distant glow, swallowed by the void. Inside the ship, Ethan Voss slumped against a metal crate, his breathing heavy. His body ached, bruises forming under his armor, burns from near-missed blaster shots stinging his skin. He was lucky to be alive. Across from him, the alien girl sat on the floor, curled up, arms wrapped around her thin legs. Her silver-white skin shimmered faintly under the dim emergency lights. Her large, glowing blue eyes darted around the room, scanning every detail. But she was silent. For the first time since Ethan had saved her, she was in a place where no one was trying to hurt her. But the fear had not left her eyes. Ethan exhaled. He wasn't good with kids. Hell, he wasn't good with people. And yet here he was, sitting across from a mysterious girl with powers he didn't understand, chased by the entire criminal underworld. His head snapped up as footsteps echoed through the metal hallways. A woman entered. She was tall, her long black hair tied into a tight braid. Her dark brown skin contrasted with the sleek navy blue pilot suit she wore. A holster sat on her hip, a knife strapped to her thigh. Her eyes, sharp and untrusting, landed on Ethan first. "I should have let you die back there," she muttered. Ethan smirked. "You're too soft, Rain." Captain Rain Zeller, smuggler, ex-pilot for the Galactic Union, and one of the few people in the universe who actually tolerated Ethan. She crossed her arms, glancing at the alien girl. "What the hell is this?" Ethan rubbed his face. "It's a long story." Rain snorted. "Well, make it short, because I just got word. There's a 1,000,000 credit bounty on your head now." Ethan's stomach dropped. 1,000,000. That was 10 times what it had been an hour ago. It meant one thing. They really wanted the girl back. Rain's sharp gaze flickered between Ethan and the child. "Who is she, Ethan?" He looked at the girl, who was now watching him carefully. That was the question, wasn't it? A name from the past. Ethan sighed and crouched down, keeping his hands visible so he wouldn't scare her. "Can you understand me?" he asked, voice softer than before. The girl hesitated. Then, after a moment, she nodded. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Ethan exchanged a glance with Rain. So she understood common. Good. That would make things easier. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. The girl opened her mouth but hesitated, as if saying it aloud was dangerous. Then, in a small, fragile voice, she whispered, "Silara." The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He looked at Rain, whose face had gone pale, because they had both heard that name before. Silara, as in, the lost princess of the destroyed world of Eltheria. Ethan's mouth went dry. He had thought it was just a legend, a rumor passed around in dark corners of the galaxy. But the girl sitting before him, scared, starving, hunted, was real. Rain took a slow step forward. "That's not possible," she muttered. "Eltheria was wiped out years ago. There were no survivors." Silara's hands trembled. Her glowing blue eyes filled with pain and memories too heavy for a child. She shook her head. "No, not all gone." Ethan's mind raced. "This changes everything." Eltheria had been a peaceful, advanced world, home to an ancient and powerful race. They weren't warriors. They had no armies. And yet, they had been erased. Their planet had been burned from orbit by the Krivok's dominion, a powerful empire of slavers and warlords. The reason? Their DNA. Eltherians had unique abilities. Some were healers, some had heightened senses, and some had powers beyond understanding. The girl's glowing hands, the blue energy blast she had used back on Ziffer 9. She wasn't just an Eltherian. She was one of the rare few with abilities strong enough to be considered dangerous. Ethan felt his gut tighten. That's why they wanted her back so badly. Not because she was royalty, but because she was a weapon. The truth and the decision. Silara took a shaky breath. They came at night. Ethan and Rain stayed silent as the girl spoke, her voice small but steady. The sky was full of fire, ships bigger than mountains. They burned everything. "My people," they screamed. Asterisk, asterisk. Her small hands gripped the fabric of her dress. "My mother, she told me to run. I hid in the tunnels under the palace. Then the slavers came." Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry. "They killed anyone who fought back. The rest, they took, I don't know where." Ethan clenched his fists. He had seen war. He had seen slaughter. But hearing it from the voice of a child. Rain let out a slow breath. "So that's it. The last heir to the Eltherian throne is sitting on my damned ship." Silara looked down, as if ashamed of who she was. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We need to get her somewhere safe." Rain let out a dry laugh. "There's no such thing as safe, Ethan." She was right. Every bounty hunter, slaver, and warlord in the galaxy would come for them now. And not just for money, for power. Keeping her alive was suicide. Ethan knew it. And yet, he looked at her, a small broken child who had lost everything. A child who was alone, hunted, afraid. And he knew what he had to do. He had spent years running, fighting for himself, surviving. Maybe it was time to fight for something more. He turned to Rain. "We're going to find the resistance." Her eyes widened. "You're insane." Ethan smirked. You knew that already. Silara looked at him, confusion in her glowing eyes. Why? Ethan crouched down to meet her gaze, and then with complete certainty he said, because someone has to stand up for what's right. And if no one else would, then he would. The bounty hunters arrive. The Starborn cut through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming softly. Inside the cockpit, Rain Zeller gripped the controls with practiced ease, her sharp eyes locked onto the glowing holographic star map projected in front of her. Destination: Sector K-12, the Red Expanse. A lawless, dangerous stretch of space. No patrols, no safe havens, only criminals, mercenaries, and bounty hunters. In other words, exactly the kind of place they needed to avoid. But they had no choice. Behind her, Ethan Voss stood with his arms crossed, watching the girl, Silara, as she sat curled up on the metal bench. Her silver-white skin glowed faintly under the dim lights of the ship. She had barely spoken since revealing the truth about who she was. Not that Ethan could blame her. He knew what it was like to be hunted. But this was different. Silara wasn't just a fugitive. She was the most wanted person in the galaxy. And that meant trouble was coming. The first warning. Rain sighed and leaned back in her chair. All right, we're about 3 jumps from the resistance base, assuming we don't get blown up first. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Comforting. She shot him a smirk before checking the scanners. Good news. Nothing on our tail yet. Looks like you got lucky. Ethan didn't believe in luck. He had survived too many fights, too many betrayals, to know that peace never lasted. And right on cue. B-E-E-P, V-E-E-E, V-E-E. The ship's alarm screeched. Rain cursed. Ethan turned to the control panel, eyes narrowing as 3 red dots appeared on the scanner. Incoming ships. Fast. Silara sat up, her glowing eyes widening in fear. What's happening? Ethan grabbed the nearest chair and strapped in. Bounty hunters. Rain's fingers flew over the controls. They must have intercepted the bounty update on the black market. 1 million credits. That kind of money could buy an entire fleet, a small moon, or an early retirement on a paradise world. No bounty hunter in their right mind would pass up a chance to collect. Ethan turned on the ship's external cameras. The screen flickered to life, revealing 3 deadly-looking starships emerging from hyperspace. The first, a sleek black interceptor with plasma cannons glowing on both wings, fast and deadly. The second, a heavy warship, its hull covered in battle scars. This one had firepower. The third, a massive freighter, modified with reinforced armor. A capture ship. They weren't here to kill. They were here to take Silara alive. Ethan's stomach tightened. This wasn't a random group of hunters. This was a hunting pack. Coordinated, experienced. And that meant one thing. Someone really wanted Silara back. The battle begins. Starborn, this is Captain Kargas of the Venom Fang. Power down your engines and prepare for boarding. No sudden moves, or we open fire. Ethan smirked. Rain. Thoughts. Rain rolled her eyes. Yeah, they can go to hell. She punched the thrusters. The Starborn roared to life, engines burning blue as the ship shot forward like a bullet. The bounty hunters reacted instantly. The interceptor dived, cutting across the Starborn's path, firing twin laser cannons. Boom. A direct hit to their rear shields. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring. Silara let out a frightened gasp, gripping the side of her seat. Ethan reached out, steadying her. Rain, we need to lose them. She gritted her teeth, fingers moving over the controls. Working on it. The warship fired next, a massive energy blast that tore through the void. Rain jerked the controls hard, sending the Starborn into a barrel roll as the blast narrowly missed them. That was too close. Rain growled. Ethan unstrapped himself and ran to the weapons station. Keep us moving. I'll handle the guns. Fighting back. The bounty hunters weren't just chasing them. They were hurting them, pushing them toward a trap. Ethan scanned the battlefield. The freighter, the slowest ship, was staying back, waiting. They didn't need to fight. They just needed to wait until the starboard was too damaged to escape. Ethan grinned. Let's ruin their plan. He activated the rear turret and locked onto the interceptor. Fire. A barrage of plasma blasts ripped through space, smashing into the interceptor's wings. The sleek black ship spun out of control, flames bursting from its engines. Damn it, I've lost control. One down. The warship, now angry, charged forward, its cannons glowing bright red. Ethan turned the turret toward it, but too late. Boom. A direct hit. The starboard rocked violently, throwing Ethan back against the wall. The ship's lights flickered. Shields at 20%. Rain shouted, "One more hit like that, and we're done." Ethan's mind raced. They needed an escape plan. Then he saw it. A gas planet ahead, swirling with green and orange clouds. A perfect place to hide. Rain, head for that storm. She hesitated. Are you insane? That thing will rip us apart. Ethan smirked. Only if we do it wrong. Rain cursed but yanked the controls, sending the starboard into a full-speed dive toward the gas giant. The bounty hunters hesitated. No one willingly entered a storm like that. They're trying to lose us. The warship hesitated, pulling back. The freighter, however, pushed forward. They're still coming, Rain warned. Ethan grabbed the comms and grinned. Hey, bounty boys, you sure you want to follow us into hell? Silence. Then, the starboard disappeared into the storm. Lightning flashed, winds screaming as their ship was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. The freighter followed, for 5 seconds. Then, a blinding explosion. Ethan watched the scanners as the bounty hunter's ship was ripped apart by the storm's brutal winds. They were gone. The starboard had survived. Barely. Rain exhaled shakily. Never. Doing that again. Ethan smirked. Told you it would work. Silara, pale and shaking, looked at Ethan with something new in her eyes. Trust. For the first time since he had saved her, she wasn't afraid of him. And Ethan knew. He had just made an enemy of the entire bounty hunter network. But he didn't care. Because Silara was still alive. And as long as he was breathing, he would keep it that way. A dangerous plan. The starboard floated in the depths of space, hidden in the swirling gas clouds of the storm. They had barely survived. Sparks flickered from damaged panels. Smoke curled from overheated circuits. The hum of the ship's engines was weaker than before. Inside, Ethan Voss ran a hand through his hair, staring at the cracked display screen. His ribs ached from where he had slammed against the wall during the fight. His breathing was steady, but his mind was racing. They had won, if surviving counted as winning. The bounty hunters were gone, but the price on their heads had just doubled. The whole galaxy would be after them now. He turned to Rain Zeller, who sat slumped in the pilot's chair, arms crossed. Her dark eyes flicked toward him. Next time you tell me to fly into a death trap, remind me to punch you first. Ethan smirked. Noted. But neither of them were laughing. Because they both knew the truth. They couldn't keep running. The question no one wants to ask. The ship's interior was dim, the only light coming from flickering emergency panels. Silara sat quietly on the floor, knees tucked against her chest. She had barely spoken since the battle. Ethan crouched down beside her. You okay? She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. She wasn't okay. No one was. And yet she was still alive. Still fighting. Stronger than she looked. Rain rubbed her temples. All right, genius. We need a plan. Ethan sighed. We need to get to the resistance. Rain scoffed. Sure. Let's fly straight into a war zone and hope for the best. Ethan leaned forward. We don't have a choice. The room fell silent. Because they all knew he was right. Silara, the last of her kind, the lost heir to a fallen world, was sitting in their ship, alone, hunted, and that meant there was only one place left to go. The Eltharian resistance, finding ghosts. Rain drummed her fingers against the metal console. You do realize the resistance is a myth, right? Ethan shook his head. No, it's real. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, and you know this how? Ethan exhaled. Because I've fought with them once. Rain's smirk vanished. Even Silara looked up, surprised. Ethan leaned back against the wall. Years ago, when I was still working for the Union, we ran into them. A small group of Eltharian survivors, still fighting even after their world was gone. They were ghosts. No one knew where they were hiding, but they were out there. And they weren't done yet. Silara's lips parted slightly. You fought them. Ethan hesitated. I fought beside them. For a brief moment, the silence in the room felt heavier. Then Rain scoffed. All right, fine. Let's say they do exist. How the hell are we supposed to find them? Ethan pulled up a star map, his fingers tracing the glowing constellations. Then he pointed. Here. Rain squinted at the screen. The Dusk Nebula. That's a dead zone. No ships, no colonies, just radiation storms and wreckage. Ethan met her eyes. Exactly. That's where they are. Rain let out a slow breath. If you're wrong, we're flying into our graves. Ethan didn't look away. If I'm wrong, we're already dead anyway. Rain didn't argue. She just turned back to the controls. Hope you're right, cowboy. She punched the engines. The Starborn groaned, its battered frame shaking as it jumped into hyperspace. Destination, the last stand of the Eltharian resistance, a trap waiting in the dark. The jump took 12 hours. Silara barely spoke during that time. Ethan checked on her, but she only sat quietly, watching the stars through the viewport. Rain spent most of the trip repairing the ship, muttering curses under her breath. Ethan helped where he could, but his mind was elsewhere. Because something wasn't right. The bounty on Silara's head had increased too fast. They had barely escaped Zephyr 9, and already the whole system knew where they were. Which meant someone was tracking them. Ethan sat at the weapons station, scanning their systems for any signs of a tracker. Nothing obvious. But his gut told him one thing. They were being followed. And he had a very bad feeling about what was waiting for them at the end of this jump. The arrival. When the Starborn finally dropped out of hyperspace, the Dusk Nebula stretched before them. A massive, swirling cloud of purple and blue gas, crackling with distant lightning. Rain frowned at the sensors. Still think they're hiding in this mess? Ethan nodded. If I were leading a resistance, this is exactly where I'd be. Silara sat up, eyes glowing softly. I can feel something. Ethan looked at her. Feel what? She shook her head. I don't know. But we are not alone. Rain tensed. She's right. The Starborn's radar flashed red. Dozens of ships. Small, fast attack craft. Larger battle cruisers. A fleet. But not the resistance. This was something else. Then the comms crackled to life. Starborn, this is Lord Vecros of the Dominion. Power down your engines and surrender the girl. There is no escape. Ethan's blood ran cold. The Krevox Dominion. The empire that destroyed Eltheria. And now, they were here. Waiting for them. Nowhere left to run. Ethan turned to Rain. Full power to shields. We're not going down without a fight. She nodded. You had to drag us into a war, didn't you? Ethan glanced at Silara. She was breathing fast, fear in her eyes. But this time, she didn't look away. Ethan grinned. Hang on, kid. Things are about to get messy. The Starborn's cannons charged as the enemy fleet opened fire. The final battle. The Starborn rattled as the first wave of enemy fire streaked past, narrowly missing the hull. The explosion of plasma rounds and ion blasts illuminated the nebula, flashing against the reinforced metal plating of the ship. Inside, Ethan Voss braced himself against the weapons console, gripping the controls with steady hands. His heart pounded, but his mind was clear. This wasn't just a fight. This was a war, and they were outnumbered. Ahead, a Krevox Dominion battle fleet blocked their escape. Sleek, obsidian-colored warships covered in glowing red symbols. Fast, deadly, and precise. The same warships that had destroyed Altheria. Their leader, Lord Vekros, had given them one final warning. Surrender the girl, or be destroyed. Ethan didn't even hesitate. You want her. Come and get her. Then he fired first. The battle begins. The Starborn's front cannons roared to life, plasma bolts tearing through the void. The first blast hit a Krevox scout fighter, ripping off its wing and sending it spiraling into a burning wreck. Ethan smirked. One down. But the victory was short-lived. The enemy fleet responded instantly. 3 attack fighters darted forward, their cannons flashing as they rained fire down upon them. A massive war cruiser, engines glowing bright orange, unleashed a wave of torpedoes, each one capable of tearing through a ship's shields like paper. The Starborn shook violently as the first impact rocked the hull. Shields at 40%. Rain shouted from the pilot's seat. We can't take many more hits. Ethan gritted his teeth. They needed a plan. Fast. Silara's power awakens. Behind him, Silara clutched the seat, her blue eyes wide, as she watched the battle unfold. The fear in her face was different this time. Not the fear of running, but the fear of losing. Her people had lost once before. She wouldn't let it happen again. She closed her eyes, her hands trembling. She could feel something inside her, a power buried deep, pulsing like a second heartbeat. A voice whispered in her mind, "You are the last of us. Do not be afraid." Her breathing slowed. Then she lifted her hands. A soft blue glow flickered to life at her fingertips, spreading outward. The ship's lights flickered, the metal humming as if reacting to her presence. Ethan turned, eyes widening. "Silara, what are you?" Boom! Another torpedo exploded against the shields. Sparks showered from the ceiling as warning sirens blared. Silara didn't flinch. She reached out, and the energy inside her unleashed. A wave of blue light erupted from her hands, racing through the ship's core, into the engines, into the shields. And then, everything stopped. For a brief moment, the battle outside froze. And then, the Starborn moved, faster than before, faster than it ever should have been able to. Rain stared in shock as the ship's thrusters roared like a beast awakening. What the hell just happened? Ethan didn't know, but he knew what to do. He grinned. Let's use it. The counterattack. The Starborn twisted through the battlefield like a phantom, dodging attacks with inhuman speed. The enemy warships tried to adjust, their gunners scrambling to lock onto them, but they couldn't. Ethan's fingers danced over the controls. The ship's weapons responded faster than ever before. The first Hunter-class fighter tried to bank left. Too late. A precise burst of plasma fire punched through its cockpit. It exploded instantly. The second fighter attempted a sharp roll, diving beneath them. Ethan anticipated it. He fired a tracking missile. It screamed through space, slamming into the enemy's rear thrusters. Another kill. The war cruiser, its captain realizing this wasn't a normal escape, began to reposition. It launched another torpedo volley. "Incoming," Rain shouted. Ethan grinned. Not this time. He activated the new thrusters. The Starborn shot upward, straight into the nebula clouds. The enemy torpedoes, locked onto their previous trajectory, slammed into their own war cruiser. Boom! The explosion ripped through the enemy ship, tearing it apart from the inside. Rain let out a disbelieving laugh. "We just made them shoot themselves." Ethan smirked. "Told you I was good." Silara, still glowing softly, smiled for the first time. But the battle wasn't over yet. Lord Vecros enters the fight. From the shadows of space, a new ship emerged. Larger, deadlier. The flagship of the Kravoks Dominion. The Nemesis. Ethan's smirk disappeared. This is Lord Vecros. You have proven to be more trouble than expected. But this ends now. A massive cannon extended from the flagship's lower hull, its core glowing deep crimson. Target locked. Fire. A beam of pure energy erupted from the cannon. A weapon capable of destroying an entire city. It was aimed right at them. Ethan's blood ran cold. There was no dodging that. Then, Solara stood up. Her glow intensified, her silver skin shimmering like a star. Her eyes burned bright blue. She lifted her hands, and the energy froze in place. Ethan stared in shock. The massive energy beam, capable of leveling a planet, was now locked in place, hovering like a frozen river of light. Solara clenched her fists. With a final pulse of power, she sent the energy back toward the enemy ship. Lord Vecros' voice roared in fury. You know, the Nemesis was engulfed in its own weapon's power. The explosion was blinding. A moment later, the Kravoks flagship was gone. The aftermath. Silence. The battlefield was empty, the enemy fleet destroyed or fleeing. The Starborn drifted in the quiet void. Ethan turned to Solara. She stood there, breathing hard, the glow slowly fading from her body. Ethan knelt in front of her. You okay? She nodded. Then, for the first time, she spoke with certainty. I'm ready. Ethan understood. They weren't running anymore. They were going to fight. For Eltheria. For freedom. For everything the galaxy thought was lost. And the war was just beginning. A new beginning. The Starborn drifted in the void, silent except for the low hum of its damaged engines. The battlefield that had once been filled with enemy warships was now empty. Only floating wreckage and burning debris remained. Ethan Voss stood in the cockpit, arms crossed, staring at the blackness beyond the viewport. His face was bruised, his ribs ached, and exhaustion threatened to pull him under. But he was still standing. And they had won. They had done the impossible. The Kravoks Dominion's flagship, destroyed. The bounty hunters, defeated. Solara, alive. But he knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Behind him, Solara stood quietly, her silver-white skin still faintly glowing from the power she had unleashed in battle. She looked stronger now, no longer the trembling girl he had rescued from the slaver's auction. She was still young, still small, but there was fire in her eyes now. She knew what was coming next. They all did. A galaxy in chaos. Rain groaned as she slumped into the pilot's seat, rubbing her temples. So, just to recap, we destroyed a Dominion war fleet, blew up a Kravoks lord, and made every bounty hunter in the galaxy want our heads. Ethan smirked. Pretty much. She let out a dry laugh. And here I thought I'd have a quiet year. Solara turned toward them, her gaze sharp. What happens now? Ethan exhaled. That was the question, wasn't it? Because while they had survived this battle, the war was only just beginning. The Kravoks Dominion had ruled unchecked for years. Their fleets controlled half the known galaxy, their slavers had turned millions into prisoners, and their power was unchallenged. Until now. Until one human and one lost girl fought back and won. And now, the entire galaxy would hear about it. The legend had already begun. Ethan turned to Rain. How long until the news spreads? She frowned, flipping through her datapad. Oh, it's already spreading. She turned the screen toward him. Holofeeds, pirate transmissions, even encoded military channels. All of them were talking about the same thing. A Kravoks warlord, destroyed by an unknown force in the Dusk Nebula. A mysterious human and a glowing child. Who are they? The Dominion is furious. They are calling it an act of war. A rebellion has begun. Ethan let out a breath. It was too late to turn back now. They weren't fugitives anymore. They were symbols of something bigger, and symbols started wars. The resistance responds. Incoming transmission. Ethan glanced at the blinking light on the control panel. Someone was trying to contact them. Rain raised an eyebrow. Friends or enemies? Ethan smirked. Only one way to find out. He pressed the button. A hologram flickered to life. A man with deep, battle-scarred features, wearing old but well-kept armor. His hair was streaked with silver, his eyes sharp as knives. Ethan knew who he was before he even spoke. Ethan Voss. It's been a long time. Ethan crossed his arms. Commander Derek, the leader of the Eltharian resistance. The old soldier studied him for a long moment before speaking. We've been watching you. You just did what no one else in the galaxy has dared to do. You fought the Dominion and won. Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't interested in speeches. Derek's gaze shifted to Silara. His expression changed. It's true, then. His voice was softer now. She's real. Silara stiffened. Ethan stepped forward slightly, instinctively putting himself between her and the hologram. The resistance needs her, Derek said. She's the last of her kind. The last heir to Eltheria. If the people know she's alive, they will rise up. Ethan already knew that. But what he wasn't sure of was whether Silara was ready. So he turned to her. This is your choice. Silara looked at Derek, at Ethan, at Rain. Then she stood up straighter, her glowing blue eyes filled with something unbreakable. I will fight. Ethan wasn't surprised. He had seen it in her since the moment she had destroyed that warship. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a warrior. Derek nodded approvingly. Then it's time you come home. The transmission cut. Silence filled the ship. Then Rain let out a deep sigh. Well, guess we're joining a revolution. Ethan chuckled. Looks like it. A new destiny. The Starborn turned toward the coordinates Derek had sent. They were heading into war. The Dominion would not stop hunting them. The bounty hunters would come for them, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Ethan glanced at Silara. She looked ahead, determined. She was ready. He was too. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something. And this was just the beginning. As the ship disappeared into hyperspace, the legend of the last Eltharian and the human who saved her began to spread. And soon, the entire galaxy would know their names.